Welcome to a conversation with a community leader, sponsored by Leadership Kitsap. I am your host, Cary Bozeman, and I'm the former mayor of Bremerton, and I'm currently a Port of Bremerton commissioner. And my guest today is certainly a community leader, Lillian Robertson. Welcome, Lillian. It's good
Thank
to have you
you.
on the program. You're welcome.
Good to be here. Happy New Year to you.
Same to you. Dr. Robertson, is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. A lot of people are just being introduced to you, Lillian. Where are you from? Where are you from? Where were you raised? What brought you to Kitsap County? I think I know what brought you to Kitsap County.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mayor. You're right. I'm a transplant here from Houston, Texas. I was born in Houston, Texas, and I'm the youngest of 12 in my family. I have 5 brothers and 6 other sisters. And I came here.
5 brothers and 6 other sisters?
Yes,
You were
yes.
one of, what's that, 12, 11?
I'm the 12th of 12.
You're the youngest of 12?
I'm the youngest of 12. And it's really interesting. Big family. My journey to Bremerton comes through me being invited to participate in a women's conference at Emmanuel about 8-9 years ago. Of course, my former late husband, Bishop Larry Robertson, was the pastor and founder of Emmanuel Apostolic Church. And he had been married for about 40 years to the late Opal Robertson, who a lot of your viewers may know and a lot of Kitsap and Bremerton may know.
Well, she worked, I knew her well, wonderful woman. She worked at the county for a long time.
Yes, yes. From everything I've learned about her has just been really, really amazing. And she was just an incredible woman. So I came after she passed and spoke to the congregation, the women in the congregation, about health and wellness. And they were interested in recommitting to making sure that they addressed some health needs. And so I was the invited speaker for the Women in Red conference. And lo and behold, on the front row was Bishop Larry Robertson. And he and I met at that time and spoke. And after that meeting and time, he was really interested in knowing more about health and wellness. And one thing led to the next, and we married in November of 2012. At the time when we married, I was in private practice for about 22 years in Houston, Texas, as an obstetrician and gynecologist. I did my medical school at Creighton University School of Medicine in Omaha, Nebraska. And my residency training was done at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. So I was in private practice.
That's a great medical school.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we met.
So
and
what kind of medicine did you practice? I'm sorry.
I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. I deliver babies and do female surgery, really extended from womb to tomb. And so we met, and Larry and I married, and I, gave up everything in Houston, sold my practice home, and moved and joined him in marriage. So funny, we had a huge wedding in Houston, and we had a second wedding in Bremerton, because it was important for Larry to not just marry me and, declare himself as my husband in Texas, but he wanted to validate me and for me to be married to the work that he was doing here in Bremerton. So it was a lot of extra effort. But right now, at the level of work that he did, I see why it was so necessary.
Well, my granddaughter lives in Houston, and out in the woodlands somewhere, they call it.
Yeah.
And she's worked for Exxon for a long time.
Yeah.
My brother lived in Houston. We're all from Texas. And my brother lived outside of Houston in a little town, I think League City, out in there.
Yeah, I didn't know you were a Texan.
I am born in Port Arthur, Texas.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, that's right near Houston area. Yeah.
I was a foster kid, so I was raised in a lot of different places and lived in a lot of Texas towns.
Yeah.
Harlingen, Allen. Gosh, I could name 10 of them.
Wow.
One of my foster parents came home one day and told us that we're moving to this place called Seattle, Washington. And that was when I was in the 8th grade, and I never went back.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. What'd your parents do
My mom,
besides have a lot of kids?
my mom was a retired school teacher,
Uh,
or she's deceased, and my dad was a pastor like Larry.
oh, he
So
was.
I essentially married my father,
What?
the likeness of him.
What church?
He pastored in Houston, and it was a Pentecostal church in Houston. He's been deceased now for the past 25 years.
Uh-huh.
And so I grew up Pentecostal, very similar to the denomination that I was a part of with Larry.
Most of all your brothers and sisters still down in the Texas area.
Yeah, they all are actually. And it's interesting that
That must be quite a deal when you go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or something.
it is. I have all of my brothers and sisters, we're all college graduates. There are 4 of us that are medical doctors, 2
Wow, that's
that are
amazing.
registered nurses, 1 an engineer, high school counselor, elementary school librarian, social worker, engineer. And so we all are college graduates.
So education, obviously, to your parents and your family were really important.
Yeah, growing up in the South, my mom was a very bright woman and made sure that that was the legacy that she wanted us to all have and maintain. And my dad, his enforcement was the spiritual component to it. So between those 2 things, I think they had all their bases covered.
We could do a whole new show on what it was like to grow up with 12 kids and a father who was a pastor. And that must have been you should write a book someday about that.
Well, Humble Beginnings is the start of it. And that would probably be the name of the book, Humble Beginnings, because I don't care what you do in terms of profession. If you have 12 kids, there's never enough money.
No. I wanted to ask you about the church a little bit after Larry's passing and with COVID. How's the church doing? Is there a new pastor? How are things going at the church?
Things are going well. Of course, right after Larry died, it actually will be a year, January 17th. We actually went into the pandemic probably a month or so later, and everything shut down in terms of, gathering as a church body. Social distancing was maintained. So we spent a large part of 2020 grieving as a church. We really missed his leadership. There's so many things that happened, the social justice issues, the pandemic, racial tension, all of that happened in 2020. And, we often thought among ourselves, what would Bishop do? What would Bishop say? But I think that we had enough of what he had instilled in us and how he led, the example of his leadership that really helped us to march forward. And so in that time of our grief, we gathered virtually. And so we made one of the things that we decided as a church body, that we wouldn't make any swift decisions during this time of grief, the pandemic, where we're not gathering together. And so Larry actually established, before he passed away, a pastoral leadership team, a team of pastors that would be responsible for making sure we were fed spiritually, handling Bible study and Sunday morning services. Little did we know we'd have to do it all virtually, but it was good because, no one was able to gather to make decisions in terms of the transferring of a senior leader. So that's where we are now. We're in a time of discernment, a time of really deciding and listening to our organizational leaders, as well as our church community, and really deciding, who, where, and what we do from this point. So that's where we are as a church. But as far as staying together and really honoring his legacy, we still continue to do that.
Yeah. Well, I would have guessed nothing else. But that's so you're plotting your way forward from this point on, after you've got a chance to grieve the loss of Larry. That makes nothing but sense. No one could preach like him, right? I mean, I used to even watch him on BKAT when, they always filmed like this program here. And I'd flip it on, and there he'd be preaching away, and I couldn't turn it off. I loved listening to him. Let me ask you a couple before we get into the Marvin Williams thing. You're a leader in this community. What do you see as the challenges coming up in the next couple of years in our community and in the African American community, in the Black community, and how are we going to deal with the affordable issues on housing and diversity? And what's your sense about our big challenges?
Well, one of the things that I sense, well, I realize COVID exposed a lot of what our challenges are globally as well as locally, particularly when we realize the impact of COVID in people of color in terms of the infection rate, 4 to 5 times greater, the death rate. And I realized that there were some initial health concerns that we had to address, particularly as it relates to pre-existing diseases and comorbidities. And so I realized that that's one of the challenges that we have to make sure of, is that health equity is moving forward and being addressed by our leadership here. Additionally,
got to make sure everybody gets their shot.
We got to make sure, and I got mine about 2 weeks ago. So
good.
I've done a lot in terms of public service announcements and making sure that our community trusts. And I tell the community all the time, the medical community has earned our distrust as African Americans, and so we have to really work hard to make sure they're earning our trust.
Well, it's hard. I think for most people, it's hard to figure it out. You're not getting enough information. I asked my doctor the other day if he knew anything about it, because I'm over 75, so I'm up there in the next group of people to get the shot, I guess. But he didn't know when they would get it. He didn't know if they would get it. I called my pharmacy. They didn't know anything. So I think it's important that people in the community get that information and understand how to, get vaccinated.
Yeah, and the thing that I think is so important too. I was in the 1A category. I still work, Cary. I still work as a full-time physician at St. Joe's Medical Center in OBGYN and women's health. And so we got vaccinated in the 1A first responder category.
Which was absolutely proper.
Yeah, absolutely proper, because I'm at, in a higher risk group. We take care of women with COVID all the time. And so that's a challenge, and just making sure that our community and the communities of color understand the importance of the need to get the vaccine. And so, again, as we said, they've earned our distrust with the history of, the Tuskegee study, Henry Lax, all those things that we've talked about in terms of disparity, medical experimentation. So now we got to go back and say, hey, this is our opportunity to examine this and put forth a medication that is good for this community because of the pandemic and, the vast exposure and the demise and, the infectious rates of people of color. We got to make sure that they're getting it and understand its importance. So that's the work that I'm doing currently. The other thing that I think is a real challenge too, that's heavy on my mind and was a real issue that we tried to address at the Marvin Williams Center, is what's happening to our children during this virtual learning space. And whether or not they are engaging and getting the most out of their educational experience. Because, when you think about it, access to Wi-Fi, access to tutors, counselors, access to parents who really understand how to help their kids navigate through these learning spaces. That's a real concern of ours. And, Larry and I talked a lot about that and wanted to have the center available for tutoring and for helping the parents understand how children learn now that they are their teachers at home. So it's one of the things we got to get the kids back up to snuff, because they're lagging behind. Children of our African American kids are lagging behind. They're not participating. It's a new terrain for them.
So it's so important and I know you know this, to get kids off to a good start, right? That first few years. Um, I know the church is pretty involved. They have daycare centers,
Yeah,
right?
we we've closed our daycare center, but at the same time, we've continued to put out programming and to do things through the community virtually through the Marvin Williams Center, addressing that. But the daycare center is no longer in
Yeah.
existence. The Embassy Care Center.
Well, I worked for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America for 28 years. So I did a lot of work in early education and daycare. And I've always felt that the first few years, and we've got a lot of parents who 6 weeks after the child's born, you know this better than I do, Lily, they got to go back to work.
Yep.
So somebody's going to raise that child, and that person's usually under trained and underpaid.
Yep.
And they might be watching 3 or 4 or 5 children at one time. And the influence they're having on that child's mind is, it's huge. And why we don't, and I'm going to get off of this, but why we don't invest more money in early child education, I just have never understood it. I've argued for it my whole life. And until we do that, we're going to have kids that are raised in situations that are unfortunate, and they're going to suffer for it later in their life. So,
it doesn't go away. We may not be addressing the issue now, but the issue doesn't go away. I just think that that we have to really still invest in paying our teachers. That's another thing. We got to pay the teachers because the interesting thing. My mom was a teacher, so I understand what that means, and I know how she was so committed to not just our education, but the education of the kids that in the community and the kids that she taught in the classroom. The value of a teacher is so far reaching until we really can't measure it. But there's literally nothing you can become in society without the impact of a teacher. And so I think once we start to value the role of the teacher, education, paying him or her so that they can do continuing education and be motivated and feel like they're valued, that's going to obviously be a problem. And getting the best out of our education system, we have to make that important.
You and I could talk about this subject for a long time. Let's talk about a little bit, because I know it's close, dear to your heart, the Marvin Williams Center. And I know who Marvin Williams is, but maybe the audience doesn't. Who is Marvin Williams, and why is his name on the building of the community center?
Marvin Williams is a young man who grew up in Bremerton, and he is a product of West Bremerton. He's a graduate of Bremerton High School, went on to graduate from University of North Carolina. He was a star basketball player in the state of Washington. And I believe in 2003, or 2000, in that 2003, he of course, completed his college time and got drafted into the National Basketball Association. So his parents were married by Bishop. He married his parents. His parents migrated here through the Navy, and his parents were married. And so Marvin was actually a product of Emmanuel and grew up in Emmanuel. And so he basically is still a friend of the guys at Emmanuel, comes back and forth during the summer. But Marvin was a child prodigy with basketball. He won state championship, won college NCAA championship with University of North Carolina, and then went on to be drafted in the NBA by the Atlanta Hawks. Played well, had an illustrious.
He disappointed a lot of people around here when he didn't go to the University of Washington. I'll tell you that, and I was one of them.
Yeah, and I think he was going in the direction of, the Tar Heels, and
Well, he went to the best basketball school in the country. So
yeah, with Dean Smith, I think. But Marvin's a great guy, and Marvin and my husband formed a partnership and talked about having an opportunity for children to have a place to play basketball. The time that I interviewed him back several years ago before the center was built, he said he just, as a kid, when school would be out, he'd scramble for places to play. There was no place to play basketball. So he would go here
Yeah.
and it would close down and go to the next place, they close down.
Yeah.
There was just no home for him. And so he
Right.
wanted more than
And
anything else to
that's
have
the
a
way
home.
it is for most kids. Most kids are, there's no parents when they come home because nobody, the day of one parent staying home and watching the kids, that's unusual. Let's
Yeah.
say that. Both parents are either working or divorced, and so there's only one parent, and you come home, you're all by yourself. So having a place to go,
A safe place.
where there's good trained supervised people there, that was the key to my life. I know Marvin's made a big contribution to the center, and I know when Larry uh, had this vision for this center, because I was mayor of the city at the time, and he called me one day and he said, "I want to buy your property." And I thought, Larry, how are you going to come up with the money for this property? Anyway, to make a long story short, he did, and he built the building. That was that's his vision, and he never backed off from it. And I just think it's a great accomplishment. So how do we move forward, Lillian, with the Marvin Williams Center? What's your vision? What's your plan? Do you have a board?
Yes, we do.
Is it a
We have the Marvin Williams Center is housed under New Life Community Development Agency, a 501c3 that was established by Larry about 15 years ago. And the Marvin Williams Center is, the site where New Life Community Development Agency does its functioning. And there is a board of directors. I am the president of the board. We meet monthly and decide the mission and vision and making sure that we are addressing the issues for the community. And the real mission of the Marvin Williams Center, New Life Community Development Agency, is to improve the quality of life of West Bremertonians and making sure that there's comprehensive programs and partnerships that will facilitate things that we can put in place in the community for the community to excel. Financial literacy, scholarship activities, tutoring for children, health and wellness programming. And so that's what we've been doing, and that's what we continue to do in 2020. Obviously, with COVID 2020, it was a non-essential facility, so there could be no formal activities. So everything went virtual. So we're in talks now with the board, making sure that once the pandemic is rolled back and ban is lifted, that we're in full force, ready to go and able to implement some programming that's going to really make a difference in the well-being of our community and our children in the community. Larry had a passion for the underserved. He had a passion for ordinary people. When you really think about the role of a shepherd and what a shepherd is, a shepherd, certainly biblically, shepherds go after their sheep. They will leave 99 to go after one that's just stuck in the fence, and he will make sure over and over again that all of his sheep are safe, led to greener pastures, and that was his style. People were better because Larry was there. He made everybody feel valued. He took the time for the underdog. It was his purpose and vision to make sure that this community had everything that it needed. That's why the Marvin Williams Center came about. If you recall, there was a community center in another part of Bremerton that was torn down. And so Larry said, we can't tear this down. City tore it down. And he said, well, we're going to do something for this community and make sure we stabilize our community and have a safe space for people to grow and for people to have time together, to learn, and to be a community together. And so that's what he did.
He thought that neighborhood needed a community center.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was important for that neighborhood.
I call him the modern day Noah, building a big ark in the city, and nobody had ever heard of rain, but he knew way ahead of time that this would be a site where that's going to be much needed in 2021 and beyond to make sure
Well,
that a community thrives.
so when somebody, by the way, you could be a preacher yourself.
No, 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 no.
Come on,
I'm a preacher's wife.
you're very eloquent when it comes to, I was listening to her and I was thinking, well, she should be preaching at the church, for God's sake. Uh,
No,
so let's talk about how many staff do you have at the center and how do you finance it?
we finance our center through galas, through grants,
Your
through
fundraising.
philanthropy, right, through fundraising opportunities. Currently at our center, we've had to back down on some staff because of the programming, but we have an administrative staff that covers everything. We are really starting to work more with younger staff to navigate us, help us navigate through the social media platforms and through the virtual spaces because it looks different now in terms of marketing. We've revamped our website and made sure that we're telling the story of how we came about, what our mission and vision is. But our staff, we have minimal staff now because this is a time
Yeah.
where we'll expand it as programming expands once the ban is lifted.
I hope someday, maybe it's already there, Lillian. Inside the building, there's the story about how the project got built.
It's really interesting. This was he didn't want his name on the building. He never wanted it to be about him. He always wanted it to be about the people
Yeah.
that he served. And
Well,
so
good people never do, but we do it anyway.
we do it anyway. We do it anyway.
That's right. Listen,
Yeah.
Lillian, is there anything that we've had a great conversation, like we could go on and on. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to kind of put into the conversation here before we close?
Well, one thing I have to say, Mayor Bozeman, my husband really, really appreciated you and really was grateful for your input. I know on probably on our last fundraising opportunity, public fundraising opportunity, you were there, gave an address and spoke to, affirming the vision that he had and how things came about. So I just want to make the community know that. I also want to make sure the community knows that we are here to stay. We are made better by the life and legacy of Bishop Lawrence Robertson, and we're all committed to continuing that. I think that may look a little different. Obviously, it has to because he's no longer here. But the mission, the vision, and the spirit behind why it was built and why it came about is still there. So I just encourage everyone to continue to look for things and opportunities that you can contribute and be a part and, just understand that this man gave this building to the community. It's not an Emmanuel thing. It's a community center. And so I just want that to be known as well.
Well said, Lillian. You are carrying on his legacy in a wonderful way. And I wish you nothing but good health and good fortune in this coming year. And thank you for all you do for our community. You're a treasure here in this community, as was your husband, Larry, by the way. So it's great having a conversation with you. This is Cary Bozeman, and we'll see you next time on A Conversation with a Community Leader.
Thank you.
Bye, Lillian.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Leadership Kitsap is our community's civic leadership program. Leadership Kitsap fosters and empowers educated, prepared, and engaged community leaders. For over 25 years, we have cultivated leaders that work collaboratively to create positive change, dedicated to making our community a better place to work and live. We expose our class to Kitsap's leaders across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. We're happy to bring many of the conversations with these leaders to you. Strong leaders build strong communities.